The white woman grabbed her daughter's hand and pointed directly at the black doctor. "People like her," she hissed loud enough for the entire business class cabin to hear, "don't belong in seats like these." What happened next didn't just shock everyone on board. It created a viral moment that would cost one airline millions and change aviation policies forever. Dr. Victoria Chen barely looked up from her life-saving medical research as Patricia Whitman towered over her seat designer purse clutched like a weapon. "Excuse me." Patricia's voice cut through the cabin like broken glass. "I think there's been some kind of mistake here." Her 9-year-old daughter Madison stood beside her, watching with wide eyes as her mother pointed at the accomplished physician. "My daughter paid for business class and she shouldn't have to sit next to—" Well, you know what I mean. But Patricia Whitman had no idea who she was really confronting. And when Captain James Rodriguez emerged from the cockpit after hearing the commotion, his response wouldn't just destroy Patricia's entitled worldview. It would expose the ugly truth about discrimination that still haunts American skies and prove that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. Dr. Victoria Chen adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and reviewed the clinical trial data spread across her laptop screen one final time. At 34, she had already revolutionized cardiac surgery with her innovative artificial heart valve design, and today's flight from Chicago to Los Angeles would take her to the most important presentation of her career. The FDA review board was waiting to approve her latest breakthrough, a miniaturized pacemaker that could save thousands of children born with congenital heart defects. The American Airlines Flight 1247 business class cabin hummed with the usual pre-takeoff energy. Executives typed on MacBooks, consultants shuffled through presentations, and frequent flyers settled into their premium seats with practiced efficiency. Victoria felt grateful for the upgrade her hospital had provided. She needed these 3 hours to perfect her presentation, knowing that FDA approval could mean the difference between life and death for pediatric patients across the country. She opened her leather portfolio, the same one her late grandmother had given her when she graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School, and carefully reviewed the surgical photos from her latest case. An 8-year-old girl from Detroit whose heart was failing had received Victoria's revolutionary device just 2 weeks ago. The child was now playing soccer with her classmates, her future bright and unlimited. These were the moments that reminded Victoria why she had chosen medicine over the easier path her wealthy family had expected her to take. Born into privilege in Atlanta's exclusive Buckhead neighborhood, Victoria could have lived comfortably off her family's pharmaceutical fortune. Instead, she had dedicated her life to developing medical devices for underserved communities, often working 80-hour weeks in research labs, while her Harvard MBA classmates climbed corporate ladders. Her parents had initially struggled to understand why their brilliant daughter was wasting her talents on charity work. But Victoria knew her purpose. Every device she created, every surgery she improved, every child's life she saved was a testament to her grandmother's dying words. "Baby girl, use your gifts to be the bridge between suffering and healing." The boarding process had been smooth, and Victoria was reviewing her surgical notes when she heard them approaching. The voices carried that particular tone of entitlement that she had learned to recognize during her years in elite medical circles. Loud, demanding, and completely oblivious to how their privilege affected others, Patricia Whitman, 42, swept into the business class section like she owned the aircraft. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early morning departure. Her designer outfit cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her entire demeanor screamed trust fund baby who had never worked for anything in her life. Behind her, 9-year-old Madison clutched a tablet and looked around the cabin with the bored expression of a child who had been flying business class since she could walk. Patricia was already complaining to the flight attendant before she even reached her assigned seat. "I specifically requested the bulkhead row for my daughter," she announced loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Madison gets claustrophobic and I won't have her uncomfortable for 3 hours. Surely you can accommodate a platinum status member. The flight attendant Maria Santos responded with professional courtesy despite Patricia's demanding tone. Mrs. Whitman, I understand your concern, but the bulkhead seats are all occupied by passengers who also have special requests. I'd be happy to see if anyone would be willing to switch, but I can't guarantee anything. Well, see what you can do, Patricia replied dismissively as if Maria's job description was personal servant rather than safety professional. Money talks, and I'm not shy about using it to get what my daughter needs. As Patricia scanned the business class cabin, her eyes settled on Dr. Victoria Chen. What Patricia saw wasn't a brilliant physician whose medical innovations had saved countless lives. What she saw was someone who, in her racist worldview, clearly didn't belong in the premium section of the aircraft. Victoria, completely absorbed in her medical research, didn't notice Patricia's stare. She was reviewing the technical specifications for her pacemaker design, making final adjustments to her presentation that could determine whether children around the world would have access to life-saving technology. The irony was devastating. While Patricia judged her based on skin color, Victoria was literally working to save lives. In Madison, Patricia whispered to her daughter, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Do you see that woman over there?" She nodded toward Victoria with barely concealed disgust. "I think she's in the wrong section. People like that usually sit in economy class." Madison, who had been raised in an environment where such casual racism was normalized, looked at Victoria and nodded. At 9 years old, she had already internalized her mother's toxic worldview without understanding the devastating impact of such beliefs. The businessman across the aisle from Victoria looked up from his laptop, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he processed what Patricia was implying. A young professional woman 2 rows back paused her phone conversation, her eyes widening as she realized what was about to happen. Patricia straightened her shoulders and marched toward Victoria's seat with the confidence of someone who had never faced real consequences for her behavior. In her mind, she was about to correct an obvious mistake. The airline had clearly made an error, and as a platinum member who spent tens of thousands of dollars annually on flights, she had every right to ensure that business class maintained its appropriate standards. But Patricia Whitman had no idea that she was about to pick a fight with one of the most accomplished physicians in America. And she certainly had no idea that Captain James Rodriguez, listening to passenger interactions through the cabin monitoring system, was about to make a decision that would change aviation history forever. "Excuse me?" Patricia's voice cut through the quiet cabin atmosphere like a blade through silk. Victoria looked up from her medical journals, her expression calm and professional despite the interruption. "Yes, I think there might be some confusion about seating assignments." Patricia began, her tone carrying that particular brand of false politeness that barely masked contempt. "My daughter and I are in business class, and I'm concerned there may have been some kind of mix-up with your ticket." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Every passenger within earshot stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the confrontation that was clearly beginning to unfold. The flight attendant, Maria, who was helping another passenger store luggage, turned toward the disturbance with growing concern. Victoria set down her medical journal and looked directly at Patricia with the steady gaze of someone who had faced discrimination before and refused to be intimidated by it. "I'm in my assigned seat," she replied calmly. "Seat 3A, which matches my boarding pass exactly." But Patricia wasn't interested in boarding passes or facts. She was interested in maintaining what she perceived as the natural order of things, an order where people who looked like Victoria didn't share space with people who looked like her daughter. "Well," Patricia continued, her voice growing louder and more aggressive, "sometimes the airline makes mistakes with upgrades and special accommodations. I'm sure if you check with the flight attendant, they can find you a more suitable seat in the main cabin." The word "suitable" carried all the weight of centuries of racism. and everyone in the business class section understood exactly what Patricia meant. Several passengers began pulling out their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something significant. Madison, watching her mother's performance and believing this was normal adult behavior, decided to join the conversation. "My mommy says people should sit where they belong," she announced with the casual cruelty that only comes from learned hatred. "And you don't look like you belong here with us." The business class cabin fell into stunned silence. And that's when Dr. Victoria Chen realized that her quiet morning of medical research was about to become a battle for human dignity at 30,000 feet. The toxic words from 9-year-old Madison Whitman echoed through the business class cabin like a slap across the face of human decency. Several passengers visibly recoiled, their expressions shifting from curiosity to horror as they witnessed a child casually dehumanizing another human being. Dr. Victoria Chen felt her heart rate increase, but her medical training kicked in immediately. She had learned to remain calm under pressure during 12-hour surgeries where a single tremor could mean the difference between life and death. She wasn't about to let Patricia Whitman's ignorance shake her composure now. "The young lady," Victoria said gently to Madison, her voice carrying the same warmth she used when speaking to her pediatric patients. "I'm Dr. Chen, and I'm traveling to Los Angeles to help sick children get better. I belong wherever I can do the most good for people who need help." But Patricia Whitman wasn't about to let her daughter be corrected by someone she considered beneath their social status. "Don't you dare lecture my child!" Patricia snapped, her voice rising to a level that made passengers 3 rows away look up from their devices. "Madison is simply stating facts about appropriate seating arrangements." Maria Santos, the flight attendant, finally reached the source of the disturbance. At 28 years old, Maria had been working for American Airlines for 6 years, and she had seen her share of difficult passengers. But she had never witnessed such blatant racism delivered with such casual entitlement. "Is everything okay here?" Maria asked, though it was obvious that everything was very much not okay. Patricia immediately shifted into victim mode, employing the time-tested strategy of weaponizing authority figures against her target. "Thank goodness you're here," she said to Maria with theatrical relief. "This passenger seems confused about her seating assignment, and she's making my daughter uncomfortable." Maria looked at Dr. Chen, who calmly held up her boarding pass. "Ma'am, this passenger is in her correctly assigned seat. Is there a specific issue I can help resolve?" The issue, Patricia replied with the confidence of someone who had never been told no, "is that business class has certain standards. My daughter and I pay premium prices for a premium experience, and that includes being surrounded by the right kind of people." The phrase, "right kind of people," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The businessman across the aisle, Robert Kim, finally spoke up. "Ma'am, that's completely inappropriate," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in corporate boardrooms. "This lady has every right to sit wherever she has a ticket." But Patricia wasn't finished. She had worked herself into a righteous fury, convinced that she was the victim of some kind of airline conspiracy. "I don't think you understand," she continued, her voice growing shriller with each word. "I am a platinum status member. I spend over $50,000 annually with this airline. I have certain expectations about service quality and passenger demographics." Dr. Victoria Chen listened to this tirade while maintaining her professional composure, but inside she felt the familiar sting of discrimination that she had faced throughout her career. She remembered the medical conference where a department head assumed she was a nurse rather than the keynote speaker. She remembered the grant committee that questioned whether someone with her background could really understand the needs of American patients. She remembered every time her expertise had been dismissed because people couldn't see past her skin color to recognize her brilliance. But this time was different. This time, Patricia Whitman had made the mistake of involving a child in her hatred, and Victoria couldn't let that poison go unchallenged. "Mrs. Whitman," Victoria said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority, I understand you're concerned about your daughter's comfort, but I think you should be more concerned about the lessons you're teaching her." Patricia's face flushed red with indignation. "How dare you presume to tell me how to raise my child?" "I'm not telling you how to raise her," Victoria replied evenly. "I'm simply observing that teaching a 9-year-old to judge people by their skin color rather than their character is preparing her for a very small, very limited life." The cabin fell silent as passengers processed the devastating accuracy of Victoria's observation. Even Madison looked confused, sensing that her mother's teachings might not be as universally accepted as she had been led to believe. But Patricia was beyond reason now. "I want to speak to the captain," she announced loudly. "This passenger is harassing my family and I demand that she be moved immediately." Maria Santos looked uncomfortable. She had received extensive training on handling discrimination incidents, but Patricia's platinum status complicated the situation. The airline's policies were clear about not tolerating harassment, but they were equally clear about accommodating high-value customers. "Ma'am, I can certainly contact the captain if you insist," Maria said carefully. "But I want to emphasize that Dr. Chen has done nothing wrong and is sitting in her properly assigned seat." "You just get the captain," Patricia snapped. "Someone with real authority needs to handle this situation appropriately." What Patricia didn't know was that Captain James Rodriguez had been monitoring the cabin conversation through the aircraft's intercom system. At 45 years old, Rodriguez wasn't just an experienced pilot. He was a man whose life had been shaped by fighting against the exact kind of discrimination he was witnessing right now. Born in East Los Angeles to immigrant parents who worked multiple jobs to support their family, James had grown up understanding what it meant to be judged by appearance rather than ability. His father had been a mechanic who dreamed of flying but was told that people like him didn't become pilots. His mother had cleaned offices at night while studying English during the day, determined to give her children opportunities she had never had. James had joined the Air Force straight out of high school, earning his wings through sheer determination and skill that couldn't be denied. He had flown combat missions over Afghanistan, saved countless lives through precision flying in impossible conditions, and eventually transitioned to commercial aviation, where he had spent the last 15 years building a reputation as one of the most skilled and respected pilots in the industry. More importantly, James Rodriguez had 3 daughters of his own, ages 8 to 12 and 16. And he understood exactly what kind of damage Patricia Whitman was doing to her child by teaching her to hate. As Captain Rodriguez listened to the confrontation escalating in his cabin, he made a decision that would change not just this flight, but the entire culture of commercial aviation. He unbuckled his harness, turned control over to his co-pilot, and prepared to deliver a lesson in leadership that none of these passengers would ever forget. "Tell the captain to hurry," Patricia was saying to Maria. "I won't tolerate this harassment any longer." Madison, watching the adults argue and sensing the tension without understanding it, began to cry. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of confusion as her worldview started to crack. The nice doctor lady hadn't done anything mean. She had just been sitting quietly reading papers that looked important. Why was Mommy so angry? "Mommy," Madison whispered, tugging on Patricia's designer jacket. "Why are you yelling at the doctor? She seems nice." But Patricia was too consumed with her own outrage to notice her daughter's growing confusion. "Madison, honey, sometimes adults have to stand up for what's right. This woman doesn't belong here with people like us." Dr. Victoria Chen looked at this 9-year-old child and saw something that broke her heart. Not malice, but confusion. Madison was beginning to understand that something was wrong, but she didn't have the framework to understand what. Madison," Victoria said gently, "would you like to know what I do for work?" Before Patricia could stop her, Madison nodded. "I'm a doctor who fixes broken hearts." Victoria explained, her voice warm and kind. "When children are born with hearts that don't work properly, I create special devices that help their hearts pump blood so they can run and play and live normal lives." Madison's eyes widened with genuine interest. You help kids. I help kids, Victoria confirmed. And adults too. My job is to make sure that everyone's heart works properly regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Patricia watched this interaction with growing horror. Her daughter was actually engaging with the woman she was trying to eject from business class, showing interest and respect for someone Patricia had taught her to dismiss as inferior. Madison, Patricia said sharply, come away from there right now. But Madison was fascinated. Mommy, she helps children's hearts work better. That's really important, isn't it? And that's when footsteps approached from the front of the aircraft, steady, purposeful, and carrying the weight of absolute authority. Captain James Rodriguez appeared at the end of the aisle, his uniform immaculate, his bearing unmistakably military, and his expression carrying the kind of gravity that made every passenger in business class fall silent. Patricia Whitman saw the captain approaching and smiled with triumphant satisfaction. Finally, someone with real authority was here to resolve this situation properly. In her mind, the captain would obviously side with a platinum status passenger over someone who clearly didn't belong in business class. But Patricia Whitman was about to learn that Captain James Rodriguez had a very different understanding of who belonged where and why. The silence in the cabin was deafening as everyone waited to see how this confrontation would be resolved. What none of them expected was that Captain Rodriguez was about to deliver a master class in moral leadership that would go viral around the world and fundamentally change how airlines handled discrimination. But first, he was going to ask Dr. Victoria Chen a question that would reveal something about her background that would shock everyone on board, especially Patricia Whitman. Captain James Rodriguez approached the disturbance with the measured steps of someone who had commanded respect in life-or-death situations for over 2 decades. Every passenger in business class felt the shift in atmosphere as his presence filled the cabin. Patricia Whitman straightened her shoulders, prepared to present her case to someone she assumed would understand her position. To Captain, Patricia began before he could speak, her voice dripping with the false sweetness of someone playing victim. Thank you for coming. I'm Patricia Whitman, Platinum Status member, and I'm having a very uncomfortable situation with this passenger here. She gestured dismissively toward Dr. Victoria Chen without actually looking at her. My daughter and I paid for business class to have a certain level of service and atmosphere, and this woman seems to be, well, let's just say she's not what we expected to find in this section. Captain Rodriguez listened without expression, his dark eyes moving between Patricia and Dr. Chen. When Patricia finished her complaint, he remained silent for a long moment, studying the situation with the analytical mind of someone trained to assess complex problems quickly. I see, he said finally, his voice neutral but carrying unmistakable authority. And what specifically has this passenger done to make you uncomfortable, Mrs. Whitman? Patricia faltered slightly. She had expected immediate understanding, not questions that forced her to articulate her racism explicitly. Well, it's not what she's done exactly. It's more about maintaining standards and ensuring that business class passengers get the experience they pay for. I'm still not clear on the specific problem, Captain Rodriguez pressed. Can you explain exactly what this passenger has done wrong? Madison, still standing beside her mother and processing the conversation, looked up at the captain with curiosity. She helps children's hearts, Madison said innocently. She told me she's a doctor who fixes broken hearts so kids can play. Patricia shot her daughter a sharp look, frustrated that Madison was undermining her narrative. Madison let the adults handle this, but Captain Rodriguez knelt down to Madison's eye level, his expression softening as he addressed the child. She helps children's hearts. That sounds like very important work. What else did the doctor tell you? Madison glanced nervously at her mother, then back at the kind captain. She said she helps kids and grown-ups too, and that she makes sure everyone's hearts work properly no matter what they look like. Captain Rodriguez nodded seriously. That does sound like the work of someone very special. Thank you for telling me that, Madison. He stood and turned his attention back to Dr. Chen. Ma'am, I apologize for this disturbance. Would you mind telling me about your work? Madison has made it sound quite fascinating. Victoria felt a flutter of hope as she realized this captain was actually listening to her rather than dismissing her. I'm a cardiac surgeon and medical device innovator, Captain. I specialize in pediatric cases and developing artificial heart devices for children with congenital defects. Impressive, Captain Rodriguez replied with genuine respect. And where are you traveling today? Los Angeles. I'm presenting to the FDA review board about a new miniaturized pacemaker that could save thousands of children's lives annually. Patricia watched this exchange with growing irritation. This wasn't how the conversation was supposed to go. The captain should have been addressing her concerns about passenger demographics, not engaging in casual conversation with the person she wanted removed. Captain Patricia interrupted impatiently. I don't think we need to get into everyone's personal business. The issue is simply that my daughter and I have certain expectations for business class, and this woman's presence is disrupting the atmosphere we paid for. Captain Rodriguez turned to Patricia with an expression that had grown noticeably cooler. Mrs. Whitman, help me understand. Are you saying that Dr. Chen's presence is disruptive because she's a cardiac surgeon working on life-saving medical devices? I'm saying, Patricia replied, her frustration making her careless with her words. That business class should be reserved for passengers who truly belong here. People of a certain caliber. The word caliber hung in the air like a poison cloud. Several passengers gasped audibly. The businessman across the aisle shook his head in disgust. Even Madison looked confused by her mother's choice of words. Captain Rodriguez's expression hardened. Mrs. Whitman, I want to make sure I understand your position correctly. Are you suggesting that a cardiac surgeon who saves children's lives doesn't have the right caliber for business class? Patricia realized she had revealed too much of her true feelings. That's not what I meant. She backtracked quickly. I just think there are certain standards. What standards? Captain Rodriguez cut her off. Intelligence, Dr. Chen is a surgeon. Education, she's presenting to the FDA. Professional achievement, she's developing medical devices that save lives. What exactly are these standards you're referring to? Patricia's face flushed red as she struggled to find words that wouldn't make her sound obviously racist while still expressing her racist intent. I think you're misunderstanding my concerns, Captain. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished. He had seen enough discrimination in his life to recognize it in all its forms, and he wasn't about to let it continue on his aircraft. Dr. Chen, he said, turning back to Victoria, I have to ask, where did you complete your medical training? Victoria straightened, slightly proud of her accomplishments. Johns Hopkins for medical school, Harvard for my MBA, and I completed my cardiac surgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital. Johns Hopkins. Captain Rodriguez repeated, his eyebrows rising. That's one of the top medical schools in the world, isn't it? Yes, sir, I graduated summa cum laude. Patricia watched this exchange with growing alarm. Every detail about Dr. Chen's background made Patricia's complaints sound more absurd and her motivations more transparent. And your current position, Captain Rodriguez continued. I'm Chief of Pediatric Cardiac Surgery at Chicago Children's Hospital and founder of Chen Medical Innovations. We focus on developing affordable medical devices for underserved populations. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly, processing this information. Then he turned to address the entire business class cabin, his voice carrying clearly to every passenger. Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone to understand what we have here. Dr. Victoria Chen is one of the most accomplished passengers on this aircraft. She's a Harvard-educated cardiac surgeon who saves children's lives and develops medical technology that helps people around the world. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. And Mrs. Whitman believes Dr. Chen doesn't belong in business class. The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out phones to record what they sensed was becoming a significant moment. Patricia realized she was losing control of the narrative. "Captain, I think you're mischaracterizing my concerns. I never said anything about her qualifications." "Then what exactly are your concerns?" Captain Rodriguez demanded. "Because from what I've observed, Dr. Chen has been sitting quietly preparing for a presentation that could save thousands of lives while you've been harassing her based on what appears to be nothing more than the color of her skin." The accusation hit Patricia like a physical blow. No one had ever called out her racism so directly, so publicly, in front of so many witnesses. Her privilege had always protected her from facing consequences for her prejudices. "How dare you accuse me of racism?" Patricia sputtered. "I am not a racist. I have black friends." The classic defense of every racist confronted with their behavior rang hollow in the business class cabin. Several passengers actually rolled their eyes at the cliché. "Mrs. Whitman." Captain Rodriguez said, his voice growing colder. "I've been listening to this conversation for the past 10 minutes. You've questioned Dr. Chen's right to be here based solely on her appearance. You've taught your 9-year-old daughter to judge people by skin color. And you've disrupted my cabin with behavior that violates both airline policy and basic human decency." Madison, who had been listening to this entire exchange, looked up at her mother with confusion and growing understanding. "Mommy, are you being mean to the heart doctor because she looks different from us?" The innocent question from her own daughter hit Patricia harder than any accusation from the captain. Madison was beginning to understand what was really happening, and she didn't like what she saw. Patricia knelt down to Madison's level, trying to regain control. "Sweetheart, Mommy is just trying to make sure we get the service we deserve." But Madison pulled away slightly. "The heart doctor seems nice, Mommy, and she helps children. Why don't you want her to sit with us?" Captain Rodriguez watched this interaction with a mixture of sadness and determination. He had seen how prejudice damaged both its targets and the children who were taught to perpetuate it. But he also saw hope in Madison's questions. Hope that this child might learn different lessons than her mother intended. "Mrs. Whitman," Captain Rodriguez said, his decision made, "you have two choices." Patricia looked up from her unsuccessful attempt to convince her daughter, fear finally beginning to creep into her expression. "To choice one." The captain continued, "You apologize sincerely to Dr. Chen for your behavior, take your assigned seats, and remain silent for the remainder of this flight." Patricia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "A choice two." Captain Rodriguez finished, "You and your daughter are removed from this aircraft for harassment of a fellow passenger, and you can find your own way to Los Angeles." The ultimatum hung in the air like a sword over Patricia's head. For the first time in her privileged life, she was facing real consequences for her behavior. Consequences that her money and status couldn't protect her from. But what Captain Rodriguez said next would shock not just Patricia Whitman, but every passenger on that plane. Because he was about to reveal something about Dr. Victoria Chen's background that would completely reframe everything they thought they knew about this confrontation. "Dr. Chen," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice now warm with respect. "Before Mrs. Whitman makes her decision, I think everyone should know something about your work that makes this situation even more ironic." Victoria looked up at him with curiosity, unsure where this was heading. "You mentioned you develop medical devices for underserved populations. Can you tell us about your latest project?" Victoria glanced around the cabin, realizing that everyone was listening intently. "I've developed a low-cost artificial heart valve that can be manufactured for $200 instead of the usual $2,000. It's specifically designed for children in developing countries who can't afford traditional cardiac surgery." "And how many lives do you estimate this device could save?" Captain Rodriguez pressed. "Potentially 50,000 children annually worldwide," Victoria replied quietly. Captain Rodriguez turned back to Patricia with an expression that could have frozen fire. "Mrs. Whitman, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to remove a woman from business class who saves 50,000 children's lives every year. A woman who could buy and sell most of the passengers on this plane but chooses to use her wealth and expertise to help those who can't help themselves." The revelation hit the cabin like a thunderbolt. Patricia's face went white as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She hadn't just been racist. She had been racist towards someone whose moral and professional accomplishments made Patricia's entire existence look petty and meaningless by comparison. But Captain Rodriguez still wasn't finished, because what he was about to reveal next would expose the final devastating irony that would haunt Patricia Whitman for the rest of her life. The weight of Captain Rodriguez's revelation about Dr. Chen's life-saving work settled over the business-class cabin like a heavy blanket. Patricia Whitman stood frozen, her face cycling through emotions as she processed the devastating realization that she had been attacking someone whose daily work was more valuable to humanity than anything Patricia had ever accomplished in her 42 years of privileged existence. Madison looked up at her mother with questioning eyes that held a new understanding. "Mommy," she whispered, "you are mean to someone who saves children." Patricia knelt down to her daughter's level, desperation creeping into her voice. "Madison, sweetheart, Mommy made a mistake. Sometimes sometimes we don't understand situations correctly." But Madison stepped back slightly, her 9-year-old mind processing something that her mother's adult prejudices had blinded her to. "The heart doctor is a hero, isn't she? Like the doctors on TV who help sick kids?" Madison," Patricia said, reaching for her daughter's hand. "Let's just sit down and—" "She is a hero," Madison said more firmly, pulling away from her mother's reach. "And you were mean to a hero." The business-class cabin watched this interaction unfold with a mixture of fascination and heartbreak. Several passengers had their phones out, recording what they sensed was a pivotal moment not just in this flight but in this child's moral development. Captain Rodriguez observed the scene with the analytical mind of someone trained to read complex situations quickly. He could see that Madison was beginning to reject her mother's teachings, which created both hope for the child's future and immediate concern for the family dynamics playing out in his cabin. "Mrs. Whitman," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the weight of final authority, "I need your decision now. Apologize sincerely to Dr. Chen and take your seats or leave my aircraft." Patricia looked around the cabin, desperately seeking any ally or sympathetic face. Instead, she found passengers staring at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity. The businessman across the aisle was shaking his head. A woman 2 rows back was whispering to her seatmate about people like this. Even the flight attendants were standing united behind their captain's position. For the first time in her life, Patricia Whitman was completely alone and powerless. Patricia started, her voice barely a whisper. "I apologize, Mrs. Whitman," Captain Rodriguez said firmly. "I need you to be specific about what you're apologizing for, and I need you to address Dr. Chen directly." Patricia turned toward Victoria, her face burning with humiliation. The words came out strangled and reluctant. "Dr. Chen, I apologize for questioning your right to be here. I was wrong to judge you based on your appearance." Victoria looked at Patricia with the same grace she had maintained throughout this entire ordeal. "Thank you for your apology. I accept it." But Captain Rodriguez wasn't satisfied with Patricia's half-hearted admission. "Mrs. Whitman, you haven't addressed the most serious part of your behavior. What about the lesson you taught your daughter?" Patricia's face crumpled as she realized the captain was forcing her to confront the damage she had done to her own child. "Madison," she said, her voice breaking, "Mommy was wrong to say those things about Dr. Chen. People should be judged by how they help others, not by what they look like." Madison nodded solemnly, but her expression remained troubled. "I know, Mommy. The captain taught me that, and Dr. Chen taught me that, but why didn't you teach me that?" The question hung in the air like an indictment of everything Patricia Whitman had chosen to prioritize in her daughter's education. She had spent thousands of dollars on private schools, elite tutors, and exclusive experiences, but she had failed to teach her child the most basic lesson about human dignity. Captain Rodriguez watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice was being served, but at the cost of a child's innocence about her mother's character. Dr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez said, turning his attention to Victoria, on behalf of American Airlines and every passenger who believes in treating people with dignity, I want to personally apologize that you had to endure this harassment. Victoria felt tears forming in her eyes as she heard herself spoken about with such respect after 20 minutes of being treated like she was less than human. Thank you, Captain. Your support means more than you know. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished, because what he was about to reveal would expose the final devastating irony that would haunt Patricia Whitman forever. Dr. Chen, he continued, there's something I think everyone should know about the work you're traveling to present in Los Angeles. Victoria looked up with curiosity, unsure where this was heading. You're the FDA review board meeting you're attending. Can you tell us what approval would mean for your pacemaker technology? Victoria glanced around the cabin, realizing that her personal mission was about to become public knowledge. If approved, it would allow us to begin manufacturing affordable pacemakers for children worldwide. The first production run would provide devices for 500 children in need. And where would these first 500 devices be distributed? Captain Rodriguez asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Victoria hesitated, then spoke quietly. The initial distribution is targeted at children's hospitals in underserved communities across the United States. Places where families can't afford traditional cardiac surgery. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly, then delivered the information that would shatter Patricia's worldview completely. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the cabin, Dr. Chen's presentation today could result in life-saving heart surgery becoming available to children whose families can't afford it. Children like those who might attend underfunded schools, live in low-income neighborhoods, or come from families that people like Mrs. Whitman typically ignore or judge. The implication hit the cabin like a physical force. Dr. Chen wasn't just saving lives. She was specifically working to save the lives of children that Patricia's worldview dismissed as unworthy of consideration. In other words, Captain Rodriguez continued, his voice growing stronger with moral authority. Mrs. Whitman has spent the last 20 minutes attacking someone whose life's work is dedicated to helping exactly the kind of people Mrs. Whitman believes don't deserve to share space with her daughter. Patricia felt the world tilting beneath her feet. The irony was so devastating, so complete that she couldn't process it. She had attacked a woman who spent her life saving children that Patricia's own prejudices had taught her to devalue. Madison looked up at her mother with an expression that would haunt Patricia for years to come. "Mommy," she said in a voice filled with disappointed understanding. "Dr. Chen helps kids like the ones you say don't matter." The words hit Patricia harder than any accusation from the captain or condemnation from the passengers. Her own daughter was beginning to see the ugly truth about the values Patricia had tried to instill. "Madison," Patricia said desperately, "that's not—" "I never said children don't matter." "Yes, you did," Madison replied with the brutal honesty that only children possess. "You always say some people are better than other people. But Dr. Chen helps all people. She's better than us, isn't she?" The business class cabin fell silent as passengers processed the devastating accuracy of a 9-year-old's moral reasoning. Madison had cut through all the adult complexity and arrived at a simple truth: the person her mother had attacked was demonstrably better than they were by any measure that actually mattered. Captain Rodriguez watched this family implosion with a mixture of professional satisfaction and human sadness. He had successfully defended Dr. Chen and exposed the ugliness of Patricia's behavior. But he took no pleasure in watching a child lose faith in her mother. "Mrs. Whitman," he said quietly, "I hope you understand now why your behavior was so problematic. Dr. Chen represents the very best of human achievement, someone who uses extraordinary talent to help those who need it most. The fact that you couldn't see that because of your prejudices says nothing about her and everything about you." Patricia nodded numbly, her entire sense of self-worth crumbling under the weight of her public humiliation and her daughter's disappointed questions. Now, Captain Rodriguez continued, I need you and Madison to take your assigned seats and remain silent for the duration of this flight. Any further disruption will result in your immediate removal upon landing. As Patricia and Madison walked toward their seats 3 rows behind Dr. Chen, Madison stopped and turned back. Dr. Chen, she called out, her young voice carrying clearly through the quiet cabin. Victoria looked up with a gentle expression. Yes, sweetheart. I'm sorry my mommy was mean to you. And thank you for helping sick children. That's the most important job in the world. Victoria felt tears flowing down her cheeks as she heard this apology from a child who was choosing kindness over the hatred she had been taught. Thank you, Madison. And remember, you get to choose what kind of person you want to be regardless of what anyone else teaches you. Madison nodded solemnly and followed her mother to their seats, leaving behind a business-class cabin that had been fundamentally changed by witnessing this confrontation. But the story wasn't over, because what happened next would transform this single incident into a viral moment that changed aviation policies forever and made Captain James Rodriguez a symbol of moral leadership that inspired millions around the world. As American Airlines Flight 1247 continued its journey toward Los Angeles, something extraordinary began happening in the business-class cabin. The confrontation between Patricia Whitman and Dr. Victoria Chen had created a ripple effect that was spreading throughout the aircraft and unknown to the passengers far beyond. Dr. Chen returned to her medical research but found it difficult to concentrate. The emotional impact of being publicly defended by Captain Rodriguez, combined with the overwhelming support from fellow passengers, had left her feeling both grateful and emotionally drained. She thought about her grandmother's words about being a bridge between suffering and healing and realized that sometimes the bridge building happened in the most unexpected places. 3 rows behind her, Patricia Whitman sat in stunned silence, staring out the window as she processed the complete destruction of her worldview. Everything she had believed about social hierarchy, about who deserved what, about her own place in the world had been shattered in the span of 20 minutes. Madison sat beside her mother, occasionally glancing forward toward Dr. Chen with newfound curiosity and respect. The 9-year-old's mind was working furiously to reconcile everything she had just learned with everything her mother had previously taught her. Mommy, Madison whispered, can I ask Dr. Chen more questions about helping children? Patricia looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw something that broke her heart. Madison's eyes held a mixture of confusion, disappointment, and a desperate hope that her mother might still become someone worthy of respect. Maybe later, sweetheart, Patricia replied quietly. Let's give her space to work on her important presentation. It was the first time Patricia had acknowledged that Dr. Chen's work was important, and Madison noticed immediately. You think her work is important now? Madison asked with the directness that only children possess. Patricia felt her throat tighten. Yes, baby, I think her work is very important. More important than anything Mommy has ever done. The admission cost Patricia everything she had left of her pride, but it was the first honest thing she had said to her daughter in years. Meanwhile, passengers throughout the business class section began approaching Dr. Chen. The businessman across the aisle, Robert Kim, introduced himself as a venture capitalist who specialized in medical device funding. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, I'd like to discuss potential investment opportunities for your research. What you're doing could change the world. A woman 2 rows back, Jennifer Walsh, revealed that she was a journalist for the Los Angeles Times. I'd love to write about your work and today's incident. The public needs to hear about both your medical innovations and what happened here. One by one, passengers who had witnessed the confrontation offered their support, their business cards, and their admiration. What had started as an attempt to humiliate Dr. Chen had transformed into the most powerful networking opportunity of her career. But the real transformation was happening with Madison Whitman. During the flight's meal service, she asked the flight attendant if she could deliver a drawing to Dr. Chen. Maria Santos smiled and agreed to play messenger. She walked to Dr. Chen's seat carrying a napkin with a crayon drawing of stick figures. One labeled Dr. Chen, standing next to many smaller figures labeled Children with Happy Hearts. "This is from Madison," Maria explained. "She wanted you to have it." Dr. Chen looked at the drawing and felt her heart swell with emotion. She turned around to see Madison watching her hopefully from 3 rows back. Victoria held up the drawing and mouthed, "Thank you," receiving a brilliant smile in return. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Captain Rodriguez made an announcement that would be remembered long after the flight ended. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I want to share something with you. Today you witnessed both the worst and best of human nature. You saw how prejudice can poison even the relationship between a parent and child. But you also saw how truth and dignity can triumph over hatred when good people refuse to stay silent." His voice carried throughout the entire aircraft as passengers in coach listened intently to the unusual captain's announcement. Dr. Victoria Chen, who some of you met today, represents everything that's right about America. She's brilliant, dedicated, and uses her gifts to help those who need it most. The medical devices she's presenting today could save 50,000 children's lives annually. Applause began in business class and spread throughout the aircraft as passengers understood they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. But more importantly, Captain Rodriguez continued, "Today reminded us that we all have choices to make about what kind of people we want to be. We can choose prejudice or understanding, hatred or compassion, silence or courage." As the plane touched down at LAX, passengers erupted in sustained applause, not just for the smooth landing, but for Captain Rodriguez's moral leadership and Dr. Chen's grace under pressure. During deplaning, something unprecedented happened. Passengers formed an informal receiving line to shake Dr. Chen's hand and wish her luck on her presentation. Business cards were exchanged, connections were made, and what should have been the worst flight of her career became one of the most professionally beneficial. But the story didn't end there. Jennifer Walsh's article about the incident appeared in the Los Angeles Times the next day, accompanied by a viral video that had been recorded by multiple passengers. The hashtag Seat of Honor began trending as people shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination and celebrated examples of moral courage. Captain Rodriguez received hundreds of letters from passengers' parents and civil rights organizations thanking him for his leadership. American Airlines, initially concerned about potential lawsuits from Patricia Whitman, instead found themselves overwhelmed with positive publicity and demands to promote Rodriguez to a leadership position in pilot training. The airline developed new anti-discrimination protocols based on Rodriguez's handling of the situation, and his response became required viewing for all crew members during sensitivity training. Dr. Chen's FDA presentation was not only successful, it was revolutionary. Her pacemaker technology received accelerated approval, and the publicity from the flight incident attracted additional funding that allowed her to expand production beyond her wildest dreams. But perhaps the most important transformation happened within the Whitman family. Patricia enrolled herself in Madison in cultural sensitivity workshops, determined to unlearn the prejudices that had nearly cost her daughter's respect forever. She began volunteering with organizations that provided medical care to underserved communities, inspired by Dr. Chen's example of using privilege to help others. Madison, now fascinated by medicine and engineering, began studying math and science with new enthusiasm. She wrote Dr. Chen a letter every month sharing her progress and asking questions about helping people through medicine. 6 months later, Dr. Chen received an invitation that brought tears to her eyes. Madison Whitman was giving a presentation at her school about heroes who save lives, and she wanted Dr. Chen to be her guest speaker. When Dr. Chen arrived at the exclusive private school in Westchester County, she found Madison had prepared a detailed presentation about cardiac surgery, artificial heart devices, and the importance of judging people by their actions rather than their appearance. My mommy used to teach me that some people were better than others because of how they looked. Madison told her classmates with the confidence of someone who had learned a powerful lesson. But I learned that the most important people are the ones who help others no matter what they look like. Patricia watched her daughter's presentation from the back of the room, tears streaming down her face, as she realized that the worst moment of her life had ultimately become the catalyst for her daughter to become a better person than she had ever been. After the presentation, Madison ran up to Dr. Chen with excitement. "Dr. Chen, guess what? I'm going to study really hard and become a doctor just like you so I can help fix children's hearts too." Dr. Chen knelt down to Madison's level and smiled. "I think you're going to be an amazing doctor, Madison, but remember, the most important thing isn't fixing hearts with surgery, it's having a heart that wants to help others." As Dr. Chen drove away from the school that day, she thought about her grandmother's words about building bridges instead of walls. The confrontation on Flight 1247 had started as an attempt to tear her down, but it had ended up building bridges between strangers, transforming a family, changing airline policies, and inspiring a young girl to dedicate her life to helping others. Captain Rodriguez was promoted to chief pilot for American Airlines' Diversity and Inclusion Program, where he developed training protocols that became the industry standard for handling discrimination incidents. Dr. Chen's artificial heart devices have now saved over 75,000 children worldwide, and her story has inspired a generation of young people from all backgrounds to pursue careers in medicine and engineering. And Madison Whitman, now 15 years old, is studying pre-med with a 4.0 GPA and volunteers every weekend at a children's hospital, telling everyone who will listen about the day she met a real hero on an airplane and learned that the most important thing about any person is not how they look, but how they choose to help others. The confrontation that began with hatred and prejudice ended with transformation, redemption, and hope. Because sometimes the most powerful force for change isn't a grand gesture or a political movement. It's one person with authority choosing to do what's right. One victim choosing grace over anger, and one child choosing to learn better lessons than she was taught. In the end, Dr. Victoria Chen didn't just save hearts through surgery. She saved souls through example. And Captain James Rodriguez didn't just pilot aircraft. He piloted human beings toward their better angels. Flight 1247 landed safely that day, but its passengers carried with them a story that would continue to inspire people around the world to choose dignity over discrimination, courage over comfort, and love over hate. Because in the end, that's what real heroism looks like. Not the absence of conflict, but the choice to respond to conflict with integrity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to human dignity. The flight ended, but the journey toward a better world had just begun.